Hey, it's TDA, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your factory in such a way that not only is it going to be super organized, it will also allow you to quickly expand your production when you need to. Now, you can use this approach from the very beginning of the game, but it will require you to plan ahead a little bit, so pay attention. Now, the way at this beginning of the game how we're going to set up our factory is in such a way that we're going to use a single dedicated input place for all our resources per resource. So what I mean by that is we're going to have one area that's going to accept technum ore. We're going to have an area in the middle over here that is going to accept xenoferrite, and then the last one is for ignium. Now, you might be wondering, DDA, didn't you just say something about the start of the game and these are cargo platforms which we won't unlock until very late into the game? You're correct, but I'm not actually going to be using these platforms. I'm just using them to show you what an endgame facility version of this is going to look like. So don't worry if you don't have access to these cargo platforms yet. What you do need to take into account is that eventually you will be using these platforms, and that means that every area that you dedicate to your production needs to be about 50 of these blocks wide. You can get away with a little less than that, you can actually get away with a little bit more than that as well, but take into account that you want about 50 blocks wide of foundation for every single type of resource that you're going to be using. And of course, we're not going to be using only 3 resources, we're going to be adding more to that, so you need plenty of space to build as well. Speaking of space, you're going to want to find an area where you can easily expand. So you're going to want to have at least 2 of these blocks available next to each other. So these kind of like larger squares on the map. And then you're going to want to have enough room to expand that should be at least 3 of these blocks deep. It doesn't need to be top down or anything like that. The direction doesn't matter. Just make sure you have enough space to build in. And ideally you want to have some technum as well as xenoferrite close-ish. But if it's not close, you can always just build a belt. So initially, if you are starting out, you might want to just set up a small facility initially and then just build some belts and blocks like that to your actual production facility. It feels like a lot of work early on. It kind of is, but it will pay off dividends later on hugely, so it's definitely worth investing. Now, on top of that, make sure there's no mountains in the way, whatever direction you decide to build in. And if you can actually build over water, that has 2 advantages. First of all, there's no mountains, and second of all, having access to water at your actual facility is super useful because you're going to need that in several places. Now, like I said, you don't need the cargo ships available just yet, you just need a central place where you're bringing in your resources, and ideally you want to bring your resources into a cargo box, something like this. Now, this is the Mark II version. Initially you won't have this available, just use the smaller one, but it is worth feeding in all your resources through a box like this and then spread it out across your factory. Now, if you do use the platforms later on, all you need to do is just set up the box right in front and then connect it with several of these connectors. I just showed you one example here, just to make sure you can offload whatever your ships are bringing in really fast. Which looks something like this. So I just have the resources coming in raw now. So like I said, I'm not using the platforms just yet. And then you're going to start just building up your production lines. Now, you're going to be crushing these ores in order to get the maximum of production. If you don't have this unlocked at the beginning of the game, you can just build some smelters, or you can just take into account that you're going to need to build these crushers and leave yourself some space. Remember, if you are actually doing this from the start of the game, these platforms won't be there, so all you need to do is just build whatever smelters you need, and then once you actually unlock the crushers, you move the incoming box back a little and just place the crushers in between your smelters and your inputs. Now, you don't necessarily need to build all your machines right from the get-go. So what I've done over here, I actually looked at the speed of a Mark III belt. So these are unlocked near the end of the game, but you already know that at some point you're going to be able to use 640 items per minute on a single belt. So you might as well look at your recipes, figure out how much that is actually going to be in terms of inputs if you calculate that per minute, and then basically divide 640 by that number, and then you know how many machines can feed off a single belt. Now, you don't have to build all of them like I've done over here. What you can actually do is just place one at the beginning, one at the end, based on the number that you calculated. Now, I'm feeding off 2 sides of this belt, so I only need half the number that I can use from a Mark III belt on one side, because of course there's going to be two sides. So in all, I can use about 16 crushers on a single Mark III belt. So I just spaced them out accordingly, and now I can delete the middle ones again until I actually need them, because as you can see, I'm actually using Mark II belts myself, so these are not Mark III yet, but I will be able to upgrade that later on. And then you do the exact same thing for the smelter. So as you can see, I have the bare bones setup here for the crushing, then I have the bare bones setup here for the smelters, and then there's another box at the end of every single production line that is just going to collect whatever the production line is producing. Now the reason for that is very simple. This allows you to just start stocking up on resources while you're building your factory. So you can easily just say, okay, I need some plates, then I can just draw these from these storage units, and again, if you have the smaller versions available at the beginning, just use those and then upgrade them later on. In the beginning, you want to set up a basic production line for the plates as well as for the Technim rods, and then in the middle over here I'm bringing in these two lines together in order to start producing and automating the building blocks, so I can actually easily expand my production area, because we're going to need a huge amount of this area. And that's a lot of blocks, so you don't want to start making those by hand. All the other things that you're going to need in your factory, like sorters, like assemblers, smelters, etc., I recommend just making by hand. You don't need that much when you're setting up your factory, and you can easily grab the resources from everything that we are now producing. And then you just keep going. So like you can see over here, I'm producing some wire. It's this exact same setup. There's a middle belt with the rods coming out from the supply depot over there. And then I'm making some wire and I'm putting them in a box over here. Now in the background here, I am producing not the advanced machinery parts, but the normal machinery parts. And the nice thing about these boxes is that they actually work as a balancer. So all the materials go into the box, and then all the materials flowing out of the box will be equally distributed across all the different outputs. So that means that there's always going to go some of these plates into the machinery parts over here, and there's also always going to be some plates go into the production line for the foundation blocks. So this is just an easy way to make sure that every part of your factory is at least doing something. Now you can actually see that I'm not producing enough plates, but once you notice that, all you need to do is just scale up the production lines that you already have, and the production will scale up accordingly. On top of that, it also means that, say for example, I've put so many blocks in production now that I actually have a full storage box full of those over here, then all the remaining plates can actually go to wherever else they need to go in my factory. So for example, this line would be full, so all the production will be focused on producing machinery parts. Just make sure that nothing goes to waste like that. Once you get to the more complex recipes, you can still apply exactly the same principles. So over here I'm feeding the wires, as I just showed before, but there's a secondary belt going around, again just being split in between here, and that is going to feed into the electronic parts production over here, which along with the wires make sure that everything is going to go in a box. And you are going to need a lot of electronic parts for a lot of the machines, so that is very convenient. At the same time, over here I am making some steel. We are going to need the ignium for that, so again the ignium is being crushed. I actually forgot to complete these, there's no sorters here, but you get the point. And there is a line of production, because we also need some ferrite from that, coming in here, going into the crushers to make the mix, and then that mix is going to go into the smelters over here. Now I am using the advanced smelters that you unlock later on, but you can use the exact same principle and initially just set it up with the normal smelters, and then once you do unlock some more advanced stuff, just take out the smelters that you already have, replace them with the more advanced stuff. All you need to do is probably move a belt a square to the right or to the left, and that's it. And then, assuming you actually don't forget to put an output belt here, because apparently that's what I forgot, we have that feeding into the box over here, which looks something like this. And now we're producing steel, which makes it super easy to also start producing some pipes. Now you don't need that much pipe production, but might as well get it going. So the other half of the steel is actually going back into the xenoferrite lane, because that is going to be needed in order to make the advanced machinery parts, which we are producing here in the back. Now again, advanced machinery parts are something you're going to need tons of, so make sure you put plenty of assemblers in order to make that. Now, in terms of actually doing the layout of your factory, you might want to take care to make sure you kind of start and end certain production lines at the same height. So generally speaking, I try to keep all my smelters aligned with each other, as you can see over here. And even these more complex production lines, I tend to kind of try and keep them aligned, so it just looks nice and easy. You don't need to worry too much about the ratios in terms of all these production lines, because they're going to be tied to each other anyway. Just make sure you're producing enough of something, but you don't need to worry about having too many machines standing there just doing nothing. As you can see, I also added in a new production line over here, which is using the same plates that we were feeding into the foundations, and then we're also going to be using the machinery parts, and that means that I can now start making some Mark 1 belts. So you can use this very early on to make sure you have both the blocks as well as the belts automated, so you don't need to handcraft these yourself. Upgrading your Mark 1 belts to Mark 2 belts is actually super easy as well, because all you need to do is put in a box and then feed that box into a secondary line. And then all you need in order to make Mark 2 belts are the Mark 1 belts, the normal machinery parts and some electronic parts. And again, you can use the exact same incoming belt for the machinery parts, so that it's not really that much work. And then very nicely aligned with the other production, we have the electronic parts being produced here, and those are just feeding back into this production line. So in between the main production lines, we are producing foundation blocks, Mark 1 belts, Mark 2 belts, and then that nicely aligns with the items that we need from the sides, from the ferrum or the technum ore production lines by themselves. And of course on the side here we have the ignium one. Now at this point we're going to want to start adding in some new types of resources as well, because you can actually progress down the technology tree from this point on really easily. Speaking of signs, it is actually now really easy to just automate your signs as well, because we're producing everything that we need. So we're going to need some machinery parts and rods for the blue signs, and then some foundation blocks and Mark 1 belts for the secondary red signs. And all you need to do is just feed them in from their respective production locations. So I'm actually using the exact same technum rod belt over here, because it's really easy to produce that in high amounts. So the foundation blocks will actually not be drawing off that much from the belts themselves. The production lines for, of course, the blocks and the belts are just fitting in with a nice little belt over here. And then the machinery parts I am just splitting off from the main production line over there as well. As long as you have the Mark 3 belts the Mark 2 belts in place, there's no problem. Now I am going to actually produce the signs in the back over here, for the very simple reason that you actually need to feed in all the different types of sciences to the same production facilities or the same research facilities later on. So bringing all of the required resources back in here just means we avoid too much spaghetti happening in our actual production facility over there. Now in terms of actually producing the signs, you don't need to overcomplicate this. Just put a single line of assemblers for each type of signs that you have access to. Make sure you feed it out in a belt into a storage box once again. And then you only need to hook up these storage boxes to the actual research centers, the research servers I should say. And you might want to relocate it a couple of times as you unlock new types of sciences. Just make sure that you keep everything nice and organized here in the back. But the way you do this doesn't actually matter, because we're kind of outside of our factory here anyway. Now at this point we're going to have access to a new type of resource called mineral rocks, and we're going to have to set up several production lines in order to take advantage of that. And again, just start out with just the basics and leave yourself some room to expand later on. So here in the middle I have the gravel set up going into this box over here, and then on the left of that I actually have the cement production. Now cement is actually made from two different types of items, so I also need to bring in once again some xenoferrite, and that is going to be feeding into this cement box over here. Then in order to turn the cement into concrete, we have a couple of these casters over here, and those are drawing from the gravel as well as the cement, but I also need water for that. And as you can see, I actually drilled down right through my facility, because remember again, we're on top of water, so I can just pump out the water from underneath, and then just have a couple of these machines making concrete. And that actually means we have another resource available that we need in order to unlock the third type of science. Now, maybe you're watching this and you're a little bit further into the game like I am, and your factory looks something like this. It looks semi-organized, but the belts are kind of going everywhere, and it's a little hard to tell what you're producing where. Now, don't worry, you can always just deconstruct the factory you already have and save up all your resources, which is exactly what I'm going to do myself. And even though it takes a while to clear out an entire factory like this, I think it's still worth it, because setting up your factory like I'm showing you right now is actually a lot more efficient even in the late game. So rather than just spending a lot of time redesigning your existing factory, you might as well just set it up brand new with all the resources you already have available. Of course, deconstructing a large facility like that will get you a lot of random resources and materials and buildings and stuff like that, so you might as well set up kind of a mall if you do that, to make sure nothing is wasted in the process. Anyway, back to the factory, we're going to need some Alumite next, and that is typically a little bit further away from your facility, and that means you're going to have to either build a long pipeline in the current version of the game. There is no way to transfer them by ships just yet, although that is going to be implemented soon. But you are going to need to set up some pumps and then basically a giant pipeline, which is pretty straightforward to do because we already automated the pipes, and then bring that all the way back to your actual production facility. So if you look at my own example over here, I'm actually transporting Alumite all the way over here to the side of my facility there. Do remember that if you're going to bring in the liquids through a pipeline, which is probably what you're going to have to do initially anyway, set up some pumps along the way to make sure the speed of the liquid in the pipes doesn't get too low. You do want to have a fair amount of liquids streaming into your factory. You don't need to place pumps all over the place, just make sure there's enough for the speed not to go down too much. With all of that Alumite coming in, we can set up some distilleries over here. You can see that happening over here as well. I put down one of those waste burn-off types of units. What are these called? Now you have access to Alumite on the side of your factory, and I do recommend putting it kind of on the side. You can start producing all of the different types of gases and liquids that you can make with Alumite. So as you can see over here, we are collecting some of these liquid polymers over here. There's just 3 of these distilleries making them. There's a waste burner right next to it, and then all of that is feeding into this tank over here. And similarly, I am producing some, what is this called again? I think it's gas, yeah, Alumite gas. 3 of them, again, 3 distilleries, waste burners, and then feeding them into this is plenty to get yourself going for a very long time. Then the next step is to turn that liquid polymers into actual polymer boards, which I'm doing over here. And again, just put that next to the facility that you already have. This is kind of like a secondary production line we have going on over here. And then that is going to be feeding into some circuit board production over here. Now for circuit boards, we are actually also going to need some of these electronic parts. And if you line these out nicely, as you can see that I've done that over here as well, you actually have the polymer boards and the circuit boards in production, and you have the Technum rods right next to that, or the Technum ore I should say, which eventually turns into the electronic parts feeding into this over here. So it still looks super organized, as you can see. Very nicely aligned, and circuit boards are actually already pretty advanced, so we're kind of getting to the mid to late game now. Now in order to really get to the end game, we're going to need some acid, which we are going to need some ignium powder for, along with the Alumite gas that we're already producing. So all you need to do is set up a second line of crushers next to the original one for the ignium, and that is going to be producing some ignium powder over here. Now I actually recommend bringing your ignium powder along the back of your factory in order to keep everything nice and neat, and then bring it all the way to the place where you're producing your Alumite based goods. We're also going to need some water, which you can likely just pump up right where you are if you are building somewhere close to water, and then the powder along with the water is going to go into this facility along with some of that Alumite gas. And then we're producing the actual acid, which once again is going to feed out in a tank over here near the end. The acid from the tank is going to feed into these liquid assemblers over here. We're also going to need some more of those electronic parts, as well as some plates and glass. And that is going to feed into these liquid assemblers to make energy cells. Now, this is the part where things can get really messy in a normal factory, but let me fly up a little higher. As you can see, we are just bringing in the electronic parts from over here. We're bringing in the acid from over there. Then, just keeping everything nice and tight, we're bringing in the plates just from the simple production plates where we're making them with a straight line right across all the other facilities that we have, and then around over here in order to go into the Technim rods. And then the glass, which I don't think I actually showed you, but you can make it straight from gravel, is being made at the mineral rock production line over here. So that is again just feeding with a straight line all the way through wherever it needs to go, and then with a straight line just into the energy cell production over here. Now what you want to do is you first want to set up the energy cell assembler so you know where everything needs to go, and then just space it out from over there, and just make sure that there's no belts overlapping. If you can avoid it, just makes everything look a lot more clean if you can keep it like that. Now you will need some bridges here and there, that's not a problem, just try to keep them to a minimum. And now we're truly getting to the end game, because we have circuit boards, we have energy cells, and all of that can feed into the production line for drones. We're also going to need to bring in some advanced machinery parts and electronic parts, but again, we already have those. So all we need to do is add in another belt of electronic parts to do exactly that. And of course bring in a belt for the machinery parts as well. And you can see there's a couple of bridges here and there now. That's completely unavoidable. But just make sure you keep all the belts as nicely aligned as you can. We kind of have a bus thing going on here almost. And then just bring them into the assemblers over here. And like you can see, we are massively stacking up now the drones. You actually don't need a huge amount of drone production, but you do want a steady flow of them. Then all you need to do is feed in the drones into a warehouse like this, and you can just put it at the end of the factory. You don't need to expand your factory much further than this, honestly. So your ships can go and pick these up and sell them at the space station. Of course, remember to actually sell stuff at the space station, you first need to repair it. So you need to build your radio tower, you're going to need to build a construction ship that I just put in the corner of my factory over there. And you're going to need a warehouse with the actual construction parts. Now, you don't actually need that many construction parts. So what I would recommend that you do is just set up a single assembler, set up a couple of these storage units, similarly to what I've done over here, and then just manually feed those into the construction parts recipe. Now, if you want to automate this, by all means, you can do that, but keep in mind that you're going to need to have 6 different belts feeding into a single assembler making that. And honestly, you don't need that many construction materials, so you don't need to automate this full time, in my opinion. But of course, you can do whatever you want. You're also going to need to build a couple of these transport ships to make sure stuff actually gets delivered to where it needs to go, so keep that in mind. Once you do all of that, you can set up a new warehouse, and that is going to collect the thermalite that you're going to get from selling your stuff at the space station. Now, if you look at this, as you can see, we are already drawing in a pretty decent amount, which means we have another resource available that we need for the 4th type of science. For the green science, you already have everything in production, of course. So you have the advanced machinery parts, the concrete and the pipes. So just feed those in and make the green science in the back, like we've done with the blue and the red. However, for the yellow science, so that's the 4th type, I actually recommend making it in the front of your base, because you're going to need quite a bit of the resources in order to produce that. Because in order to make the last type of science, or the second to last I should say, we have the circuit boards in production, we have the energy cells in production over here anyway, and we're going to need a warehouse to bring in the thermalite parts, so we might as well just place the warehouse next to the other one, and then we have all 3 types of resources that we need in order to make the yellow science. Now again, just make sure you put it in a box, and then what we need to do is bring a single belt of that yellow science all the way to the back in order to combine it with the other 3 types that we are already producing over there. Which is then going to look something like this. So we're producing the green science over here. This is the red and blue science that I showed you before. We are now bringing in a belt with yellow science all the way from the other side of the factory and combining it into these servers over here. Now I've put 2 of these in the middle, and then 2 of these on the side that are actually wrapping around the back over here. So you can see, look, that's a lot of science. And all of this is feeding into these servers in order to get the science production up and running. And that is the 4th type of science done, which actually unlocks pretty much the entire technology tree. There is only one type of science left that you need some robotic parts, hydraulic pistons, and CPUs for, but you can apply the exact same reasoning to what I've been showing you so far. So I kind of think you get the point by now. Also, don't forget that at this point you actually have access to the cargo ships, so you can either expand this factory using the same methodology that I just showed you, or you can just start exporting stuff using your cargo ships and then start making your robots wherever you want in the entire map. Those will actually fly wherever you want them to, so that is a way you can progress if you want. Either way, as you can see, this is a super sleek looking factory. I also like the lights, don't forget to put those in because that just makes everything a lot better as well. Super organized, easy to know what you're producing where, because this is everything related to technum, this is everything related to ferrum, this is everything related to ignium, this is everything related to the mineral rocks, and then in the back over here we have everything related to the Alumite production. And then of course you can add in the other remaining materials that you can start producing at this point as well. If you want to the mix as well, you can just put those on the side over here and continue from there on. You have the warehouses in production, you can see the ships flying on and off, so everything really is starting to come to life now. I really think this is the most efficient way to set up your factory from the early parts of the game. However, there is one part that I skipped over, which is power. Now, I recommend that you switch over to solar power as soon as you get access to it. As soon as you start making energy cells, it should be fairly easy to just start transferring everything to solar power. Up till that point, you're going to need to work with biomass burners initially and things like that. Just keep them to the side of your factory. You can also run your entire factory on things like turbines and stuff like that. You have easy access to water, hopefully, next to your factory anyway. And you can just use your ignium production, so this line over here, just have a single line going out into the side and have that power your boilers if that's what you're using initially for energy as well. All in all, don't worry too much about where you put your power production, just make sure it doesn't get into the way of your factory, because as soon as you reach energy cells, you're going to want to set up a solar farm, something similar to this, and that is going to produce you all the power that you need. Now, keep in mind that this is only going to work through the day, so you also want to set up plenty of batteries, initially the small ones, but later on the larger ones. Just hook them all up together, but make sure that you have plenty of storage to make sure your factory doesn't completely come to a halt during the night. And that brings us to the end of the guide on how to set up your awesome looking super organized facility like we've done over here. And actually, if you look at it like this is the entire facility that allows you to complete like 90% of the game. It's not that much, is it? It's actually really straightforward if you keep it very organized like this. It's actually really fast to progress through the game like this as well. Although, of course, you're going to spend several hours upon hours to actually set all of this up. But once you do, everything just flows together. And the nice thing about keeping everything close together and organized like this is you're actually not going to waste a lot of time redesigning stuff or bringing in resources from awkward places. Although you might every now and then have to build a longer belt or pipeline or whatever initially to set this up. It will pay off dividends in the long run. So I do highly recommend that you start up your facility from the get-go in a organized manner like this. Now, if you found this useful, make sure you give the video a like. It really helps me out. Leave your questions, comments, suggestions in the comments as well. Also really helps me out, but others might be able to benefit from it as well. And if you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.